Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for being here. And we've got lots to get through tonight, so I'm going to get started. A couple of things. I would love it if you could have your video on. I know that's a little bit confronting, but we are talking about menopause. And frequently at menopause, we feel invisible, and I'd like you to be seen. So if you have the courage, put your video on so we can witness you and see you, and I'd be most grateful. Now, thank you so much for being here. My name's Brenda Rogers, and I am fascinated with midlife and the menopausal transition. And I have been collecting information now for several years from various sources. Some of you will know some of these. Lara Bryden, who's amazing, Jane Usher from the University of Western Sydney, Jane Hardwick Collins, who's a former midwife and an educator, and so on, and many more. And I just want to honour and acknowledge those women who've come before me. So what I'm sharing with you tonight is a compilation and a distillation of all the things that I've been learning in sort of high-level, summarised, introductory form. And it's designed to give you something to think about. It's designed ideally for us to have a little bit of a breakthrough in our perspective on menopause and for you to come out empowered. That's my intention for this evening. So hopefully we're aligned with that. I think I muted though. Thank you, everyone. All right, so I would like you, if you've just come in, I would like you to have a piece of paper and pen ready, and I'm going to explain why in a moment. But first of all, as I am likely to often do, I want to start with grounding. And so put your feet on the floor, put your pen down, put your glass of wine down just for a minute, and close your eyes and allow yourself just to be still. So allow yourself to come into the present moment, allow all of those things that have been bothering you today to drain out of your fingertips and bring your attention down to your breath. And simply take 2 very nice, very long, deep breaths. Now, isn't that better? Thank you so much, everyone. I think that it's much easier for us to absorb knowledge when we're grounded and earthed and relaxed. And we've just, with 2 breaths, switched on the parasympathetic nervous system so that our digestion actually happens as well, in case you're eating dinner while you're watching this. Now, that piece of paper, what we're going to do, so what I'd like you to do is to have a piece of paper, lined or unlined, it doesn't matter, and I'd like you to have it landscape. And I'm going to give you an idea of what I want you to do. So I'm going to share the whiteboard with you. And just give me a nod that you can see that okay, the whiteboard, excellent. All right. So you're on your piece of paper, which is landscape style. You're going to divide it into sort of thirds. So 1/3 there and 1/3 over here. That my thirds aren't very good. You can do better thirds than I can. So I want you to do thirds down your page. Now, if you're a prolific note taker, you might need a couple of pages. But I want you to be able to take away something that's a memory jog for the information that you're receiving tonight. So please grab a pen and paper, write out your lines here towards the top, just beneath the heading. There's another line, And what we're going to do, or what I want you to do, is to put over on the left-hand column, cycling woman. So this cycling woman, not that she's on a bike cycling around town, but she has a menstrual cycle. And over on this side, the right-hand side, I want you to put no longer cycling. So you get a sense there. So that's how it looks. And we're going to build on this. So I'm going to stop sharing, but now you've got a sense of it. You'll know where I want you to put everything. And I'll come back to a heading in a moment. All right, so I'm just going to save that, and I'm going to come out for a moment and start to give you some information. So on your left-hand column, what I want you to put there is we're going to define this cycling woman versus the non-cycling woman. So the cycling woman, down the left-hand column, I want you to put reproductive. So a woman who is cycling has the potential to create children. On the right-hand column, I want you to put free of reproductive responsibility. And that alludes to the freedom that is available to a woman once she's no longer cycling. All right, what else is different? So we're working on the sort of physical things here. On your left-hand column, back to the cycling woman, I want you to write youthful body and looks. So 20s, 30s, 40s, we still have youthful skin and most things intact. And we still feel very connected to how our bodies look. Now, in the right-hand column, visible signs of aging. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So there is, with the withdrawal of estrogen out of the body, there is a natural decline in libido and a natural decline in desire to mate for the purposes of reproduction. Let me put it that way. And our hormones kind of match that. And I'm going to explain why in a minute so you understand why that is, because a lot of women complain about low libido after menopause. And we really need to reframe that conversation, because you just cannot expect things to be the same after you've stopped cycling, because your hormones are different. There's a different imperative for the hormones. All right, let's talk more about that. Let's go back to the left-hand column, and I want you to put driven by estrogen and progesterone. So just remember back to your teens, early teens. You were walking along, innocent little 10-year-old, 11-year-old, and then puberty hits, right? And in floods estrogen, and in floods progesterone, and testosterone is a part of that as well. And everything changes, right? You go from an innocent child to someone who's, let's call it horny, looking to mate, interested in the opposite sex or not. Also worried about how you look, and more more sort of compliant, more worried about what people think, and more worried about pleasing others. These are all the effects of estrogen. Estrogen is a hormone of compliance, and it hijacks, in a way, our bodies from puberty through to late 40s. And so when on the right-hand side, I want you to put driven. This is not technically correct, but for the purposes of our exercise, I want you to put down the right-hand side, driven by FSH and LH. FSH and LH are different types of reproductive hormones that come from the brain, from the pituitary and the hypothalamus. And those hormones are less concerned about the biological imperative to reproduce the species. I mean, that is the intention of estrogen and progesterone, is the survival of the species. If we don't reproduce, then we die out. And so all of those qualities, all of those physical changes, all those emotional changes, and all those psychological and psycho-spiritual changes that occur in our teens are all designed for the survival of the species. There's nothing you can do about it. It's primal. And so in our once we've finished cycling and estrogen has withdrawn largely, then we're driven more by the FSH and the LH, and they have a much more spiritual role, I suppose you could call it. They are hormones of insight, intuition, and awareness. So we're biologically moving into a more sensitive, at every level, stage of our lives. All right, let's keep going. Back onto our left-hand column, the basal metabolic rate is higher. And that's because the reproductive cycle is an energy-hungry process in the body. It keeps us busy. It's a little bit stressful for the body. In fact, the most stressful time of your month is just before and the first few days of your period. And that's, of course, when we get all the PMS, because it's an additional huge stress on the body to cycle. So on the right-hand column, you want to put just the opposite of that. The basal metabolic rate is lower. And so if that is the case, then, and you keep eating the same as you were when you were cycling, then you will gradually and naturally put on weight. And typically it'll go around the belly, but it could be all over. And so we know that for weight maintenance at the end of the cycle, and certainly the first few years into it even more, you have to find a gentle way to eat a little bit less. Now, most of us are too busy to think about it. Most of us have got our attention on our work and other things and not really in our bodies, not really listening to our bodies saying, you know what, I don't need so much. You know what, I could skip that snack. But once you are present in your body and more connected, you start to listen to those messages. Anyway, let's go back to our left-hand column. This is basically an direct influence of estrogen and progesterone, and that we are focused on others, particularly the family. So the cycling woman who's driven by estrogen and progesterone is driven to take care of the family unit. This is once again that biological imperative for the reproduction and survival of the species. On the right-hand column for the woman who's no longer cycling, we are focused on ourself way more. Focused on ourself, our passions. So suddenly we start thinking, I'm done with all of this ferrying kids around, being the taxi mum. I want to do my thing. I want to go and travel. I want to study. I want to start a business. I want to I want to leave. I want to do. So all of this is a natural part of the transition from being estrogen driven to not being estrogen driven. All right, so back to our left-hand column. The cycling woman is way more compliant. She's compliant and she's protected because of estrogen. On the right-hand column, we can say something like the opposite to that is that we're wilder and rawer. Wilder and rawer. Now, the protection part of it is physical protection. So estrogen is a natural anti-inflammatory and it's very protective. So you become less, your body's less able to tolerate what you're doing to it if it's not that healthy. Once estrogen has withdrawn, and this is why we tend to get joint pain and more inflammation in the body and inflammation-related obesity, and a lot of the common symptoms associated with menopause is really due to the withdrawal of estrogen, which, by the way, is absolutely normal. It's meant to. And so it's really a warning to get yourself healthy before you hit your 50s, even earlier. I hope there's women who are 40 or younger watching this right now. All right, let's keep going. Left-hand column. The cycling woman is valued by society. She's valued for her beauty, her youth, and her economic value. On the right-hand column, we can say that the older woman is mocked and shamed. The overall experience is one of becoming invisible. And I've done a lot of research on the narrative in medical literature on women who are postmenopausal. And the nurses research the research published in the Nursing Journal indicated that the overarching narrative in the medical literature and in the medical industry and this is filtered out into our common culture as well, is that menopause is decline and decay. They use those words quite specifically, decline and decay. And I think that that's very disempowering, and I'm determined to change that narrative. And I think there's a lot of women out there who totally disagree. And fortunately, they go to their doctors, and if they don't like what they hear, they go somewhere else. And I encourage that. All right. So we're going to get a little bit metaphysical now with our distinction between the cycling woman and the non-cycling woman. And that the cycling woman is yang. So if you know about yin and yang, then the cycling woman phase is way more yang. And at the non-cycling woman phase, we're moving into a yin, a way more yin and feminine stage of our lives. It's in the yang cycling phase, we have a more physical orientation because everything's intact. We still have, maybe high libidos with all this going on. But as we move into the non-cycling phase of our lives, we become more spiritually focused. So the body starts to drop away in a way, our focus moves more into spiritual pursuits. Now that might not happen till you're 60 or something like that, or it's a gradual increase, but that's typically what happens. Now, your 50s and 60s aren't as yin as your 70s and 80s, but they're definitely more yin than the yang phase of the cycling woman. On that line, in that vein, the other metaphysical symbols and archetypes represented by the cycling woman are things like summer. So we have seasons in our life, and the mother season, which is basically from puberty to menopause, or really from 25 to 45, this mother season is represented by summer. It's also represented by midday, the most yang, active, hot time of the day. It's also represented by the ovulation in a woman's 4-week cycle. It's also represented by the full moon. These are all the fullness. It's the full bloom, if you want to use a nature analogy. And then other archetypes representing the mother. And I know we're getting into sort of more, woo-woo stuff here, but these archetypes are fabulous for helping us identify with role models that aren't celebrities that can help us realign our perspective on who we are. So the one that you would know the best that represents the mother phase of a woman's life is Mother Mary, or Mary Magdalene. She's a female goddess or archetype or deity that has been in the Christian culture for 2,000 years. And these myths are very powerful. So compared to the woman who's no longer cycling, we're now into autumn. We're now into dusk part of the day. We're into week 4 of the cycle, the week just before your period. We're into the waning moon of the lunar cycle. And we're into, as far as archetypes go, we're into the grandmother archetype. This can be represented by more recent understanding of the, you've probably heard of the maiden, the mother, and the crone. Well, we've now inserted a 4th one, which is the maiden, the mother, the marga, which is a, I want to say Greek word, a Latin word, representing great mother, and the crone. So we have these 4 phases in a woman's life as well. So some of those archetypes have been turned into witch type of archetypes, hags and crones, and this is really showing how we poorly represent the older woman. But some of them that you might be familiar with, probably not. Kaliak, Pele in the Hawaiian tradition. Kaliak is a Celtic goddess, crone goddess, and there's lots more. So there is the distinction between the cycling woman and the non-cycling woman. And I'm just going to check the chat to see if I've got any comments here. Yeah, not woo-woo at all. Thank you, Gillian. Geriatric pregnancy, if you have a pregnancy after 40. Very much so. Well, the Chinese call menopause the second spring, so I think they're way more on track. All right, let's go back to our whiteboard, because I want to include now a new section. And I want to add up here something that you can tell already is occurring. Just think about it. You're going from the cycling woman and all of those things that we've just outlined to the no longer cycling woman, which is quite different. So the overall experience for women in this middle phase is that everything is changing. Absolutely everything is changing. And that can be extremely disconcerting. All right, so now I want you to draw a line under the things that you've written, because we're going to go into our next section here. Now, first of all, let me tell you that the line here, right next to our no longer cycling heading, is where menopause stops. I can't write on the side, but maybe you can write on the side that line there on the right-hand side of your page is when menopause stops, or around about. Menopause is technically 1 year after your last period, so it's around that time. All right, so what I want to talk to you about now is something also a little bit from the ancient women's mysteries, and that is that this middle section here is a rite of passage. And the technical definition of a rite of passage is basically changing from one status through to another. And that's definitely what's occurring here, from going from a cycling woman to a no longer cycling woman. So this section here in the, let me try this one, in the middle here is, wait for it, perimenopause. So the cycling woman, you could say, is around age, say, 15 to 40. You can put that under the heading there. Cycling woman is 15 to 40. And then no longer cycling, average age of menopause is 51. And this 10 years here, from 40 to 50 roughly, is perimenopause. And that's the technical definition of perimenopause. It's basically 10 years prior to the cessation of your period. Now, I just want to give you a little bit of background, kind of professional information here to explain a rite of passage. And this is really important because of what I'll be sharing with you after this. And I'm just going to write these words out before I take away my screen sharing again. Separation, and it's deliberately over this line, separation. And then liminality, which I'll explain in a moment, and incorporation. So bear with me with this. This is really important and just a little bit sciencey to start off with. All right, so write those things down: separation, liminality, and incorporation. All right, so I'm just going to stop share for a moment. Okay, so let me tell you what's happening. In the first stage of perimenopause, we're starting to separate from being a reproductive woman. This is sort of pre-menopause or pre-perimenopause is a fully functioning reproductive woman. And in the separation phase of a rite of passage, we're starting to unhook from who we have been. And either you're consciously aware of it or not, but it's happening anyway. And typically what people are feeling at this time is not a lot, because usually they're in denial. And I notice this all the time. Women in their 40s, not really aware that they're starting to step into perimenopause. The other experience that I notice is that goes with that denial is ignorance. So unfortunately, because we don't have red tents where we have chats with the older woman once a month and find out what it's all about going through menopause, we separate our old people into old people's homes and all that kind of thing. We often don't have conversations with our mothers about any of this stuff. Then we are ignorant when we enter the perimenopausal stage. So separation is associated with denial and ignorance. And unfortunately, that sets us up for a really distressing experience in many cases. So the next stage is liminality. Now, liminality is a fancy word. Basically, it means threshold. So you can imagine that your separation, you're premenopausal, you're a cycling reproductive woman, and then you're starting to move into aging, into the end of your reproductive phase of your life. And at some point you step through this threshold and into the next stage. Now, the experience of liminality is confusion and overwhelm. It's because you're not who you used to be, and you don't know who you are yet going to be. And this is a rite of passage, and these stages are the same for when you're having a baby. You're going from not being a mother through a pregnancy into being a mother. That's a rite of passage. Same with young girls. You're going from being a child and into puberty, which is a rite of passage, and into becoming a reproductive woman and an adult. So these are really well-researched stages in a transition from being a reproductive woman into a non-reproductive woman. And then the final stage, and this all happens kind of over 10 years, the final stage is incorporation. And under incorporation, you can write acceptance and affiliation. Or not. So a lot of women get very distressed about becoming an older woman. The depression rate's extremely high. And the concern for women's mental health at this time is very concerning. And there is no affiliation or acceptance. There's resistance, and there's trying to chase youth, and nothing wrong with plastic surgery, don't get me wrong, but this is the time when women start to seek all of those things, because they're moving into a stage of life that has such a negative connotation that they really don't want to go there. And we can't blame them, really. Been there and done that myself. So typically rites of passage, especially ones that are valued and acknowledged in our culture, are represented by celebration. Once we get through that threshold and move into the second phase, the second level of status, there's usually a celebration. It's like bar mitzvahs or 21sts or 18ths or baby showers or weddings. These are all celebrations representing a change in status. And they're often celebrated with a ring. There's the ring motif, or the ring concept, which comes from way back in pagan times, really. And we don't have a celebration like that for menopausal women. It's like we just fall off the end of the planet and nobody really wants to know about us. And it's such a shame, because with that FSH and LH running the show, with the withdrawal of estrogen from our bodies, and the power that can flood through your body in this fiery autumn stage of life, the potential for us to become compassionate leaders, the potential for us to contribute to society, to make change, to build great businesses, with consciousness and awareness and compassion and all these things, is huge. This is the role of the 50-year-old woman, to be these things. And yet in our culture, we typically have a much less happy perspective on the 50-year-old woman. Just because we're going grey and we're sagging a little bit has nothing to do with our potential for power. I mean, you think all those years experience, looking after kids, looking after the kitchen, looking after, making money, and all those pitfalls that we've fallen into and come out of, all that trauma and grief that we've gone through, and we emerge into our 50s something quite extraordinary. All right, so let's go back to our screen share, because we're moving now into our next section, which is underneath. I'm going to run out of room. Hopefully you've got room left. And that's really what's happening to us physically and emotionally. It's really connected. But this next thing that I want to, next sort of chapter heading that I want to talk to you about, is what all of this does to a woman's body. And basically, one word:
stress.
Thank you, someone. One of my mentors, a lovely lady called Nancy, she calls it an endocrine challenge, or actually she says an endocrine screw up, basically. And I'm going to share with you the four. There's lots of things that happen, and a lot of it you'll be aware of. I want to show you the four areas of our endocrine system, our hormonal system, that get impacted by the stress of menopause. So we have here an endocrine, can't spell, challenge. And there's really four areas, and I'll just write them in so you can see what I'm talking about. These are kind of not so much related to the lines anymore, but this is the progesterone, and then estrogen, so we lose progesterone in our 40s. That's the first thing to go. And then estrogen is in your later 40s, early 50s. That's the second thing to go. That's all normal. Progesterone and estrogen, those declining, even though they might be a little bit like this, that's perfectly normal. But our blood sugars and insulin, hugely challenged. That's not normal for that to go out of balance. Common, but not normal. And then the other one that I want to share with you is cortisol, stress hormones. So save. So progesterone. So there's a lot I can tell you about progesterone. Basically, it's a happy hormone. It makes us feel good, and it occurs because we ovulate. Now, if you've been on the pill for a long time, you haven't ovulated. You've been taken over by the pill, which gives you a sort of a false cycle. It's not a real cycle. So the true joys and benefits of cycling and ovulating come from progesterone. And lowered progesterone is quite a lot of stress to the body. It messes with our brain chemistry, and this is one of the key reasons why we can't sleep. So low progesterone creates low mood, and it creates poor sleep. If you combine that with our busy lifestyles and what we're often doing at this age in our mid to late 40s, separation, relationship challenges, relationship stress, we might have teens or young adults, more stress. We might have elderly parents that we're also looking after, more stress. We might be more responsible in our work because we've worked our way up the ladder, more stress. And then on top of that, you add perimenopause. And this is why it's an endocrine screw up for us ladies. Estrogen, you lower estrogen towards the end of the 40s, as I mentioned. And what tends to happen is our protective mechanism goes away, and we tend to have increased inflammation. Now that can come out differently for different people. It can mess with the brain, it can mess with the gut, it can mess with joints, and there's joint pain is quite common. But the withdrawal of estrogen has huge impact on the body. The skin gets drier, there's less muscle tone, you can get challenges with urination and holding on, and leakage, and dryness occurs associated with the withdrawal of estrogen. Dryness can be a big problem, not just for the skin, but for the mucous membranes, including the vaginal area and other areas of the body. And typically what occurs, this is very generalized, but typically what occurs with the lowering of estrogen is pain and anger. Because estrogen, as I mentioned earlier, is a hormone of compliance. It makes us easy. It makes us chilled. It makes us calmer. Thank you. And you lose that. And so you become more fiery. And for many women, it's the first time in a long time they've actually got angry. Doesn't mean that's a bad thing. Sometimes it's the self trapped inside that wants to come out, that goes, I'm not taking it anymore. I'm sick of picking up after everyone. Why doesn't anyone do anything around here? That's estrogen withdrawal. And so that, for some women, can be quite a challenge to deal with, because they become very intolerant, and it can create conflict and frustration and blow-ups and all kinds of things. So it's really important to understand what that anger is trying to tell us, what that anger is trying to, what it's showing us a way forward. Emotions are always feedback. They're information, intelligence. You know, we want emotional intelligence in our 50s and beyond, so that we can do what we came here to do, which is some kind of sacred mission. And the most rewarding way to age and step into your wisdom years is to have a sacred mission and to know what it is and to get out there and do it. All right. So that lowered progesterone, lowered estrogen, perfectly normal. It's not, menopause and perimenopause is not, hear me, not an estrogen deficiency syndrome. That is awful. That is medicalizing a natural phase of life, and I don't like it, as you can tell. So progesterone and estrogen are meant to withdraw, and if we're healthy enough and vibrant enough and strong enough, then we'll probably go through it reasonably easily. I don't like to say that you should go through it without a blip. It's meant to be disrupting. It's meant to change you. It's meant to help you become an even better person. Typically in our culture, though, we're very carb addicted. Women worry about their fat intake, and their protein intake isn't high enough, and we end up, because we're busy and stressed and looking after everyone else, we end up eating way too many carbs. Most of us have a problem with insulin and blood sugar regulation, and the hormones that regulate blood sugars are part of the endocrine system. The pancreas is part of, or the hormones secreted by the pancreas is part of the endocrine system. It's also, blood sugars are also impacted by stress, in that we raise adrenaline and cortisol levels, and that increases blood sugars as well. So you can be a thin diabetic because of stress. If you're a stress head, that'll raise your blood sugars. Typically, you'll know if you've got a blood sugar and carb issue because you crave carbs, because you're putting on weight around the middle, because you love your pasta and your bread and you can't give it up. And there's a lot of weight gain associated with poor blood sugar regulation. It tends to stuff up the liver as well and give you fatty liver and other conditions, including anxiety, associated with poor blood sugar regulation. The joys of removing all those carbs from your diet, even though it's tough, and I'm talking really here about a very nutritional ketogenic diet, not the one starting with A, which I won't mention, because, and not paleo either, but to get yourself into a low carb, high-ish fat, high-ish protein diet seems to be, I know I'm generalizing, seems to be, it feels so good. Women just transform just from that. The moods regulate, the sleep improves, the crave carvings disappear, the moods kind of regulate and even out. It's amazing. And then the fourth one I want to talk to you about is cortisol. So cortisol is a rat bag thing. Cortisol, healthy cortisol, is what wakes us up in the morning. But if you are yang all the time, if you never take any time for yourself, if you're always on the go, if you can't sit still, if you can't take a holiday, if even your leisure time is doing, then you will be cortisol addicted and depleted. That depletes our energy reserves, and typically what happens is you can get low thyroid function because of the competition for pregnenolone, which is a whole other webinar. Secondary low thyroid function can be related to stress, and then of course that will put weight on, that'll increase your cholesterol, that'll make you depressed. Low thyroid function is not good. Certainly high cortisol will impact your sleep and make it difficult to sleep, and you'll wake up at 3 a.m. typically. And some women have cortisol addicted weight gain as well. So high cortisols can be a reason why the weight can be so difficult to come off. So all of that is really all those 4 areas: progesterone, estrogen, blood sugars, so insulin, blood sugar regulation, and cortisol, is really all of that out of balance or not well managed leads to anxiety and overwhelm. I mean, anxiety can be related to blood sugars, but typically with all of that change that's occurring, when you're transitioning from the joys and the familiarity of being a reproductive woman into basically a wild woman in our 50s, we can probably label ourselves as wild women. All of that psychological change that occurs and the emotional roller coaster that goes with it frequently results in anxiety and overwhelm. And when you've got that whole package, then you can see that quite easily why women are so prone to what I call the lady killers, depression, which leads to suicide, and heart disease, biggest killer of women, cancer, especially breast cancer. And it means something that the cancer occurs in feminine tissue, basically, that's not an accident. And that is that we have, simplistically, we may need to look at embracing who we are as a woman. Maybe it's about more yang, feminine qualities coming out through us into our wisdom years. And osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is extremely common. Obviously, it's related to mineral intake in the diet, but it also, from a metaphysical mind-body medicine perspective, relates to being invisible. So that's typically how women feel postmenopausally. All right, the next stage, we've got a few minutes now because we're going to finish hopefully as best we can on time. And if you've got questions, pop them away in the chat and I'll get to them when I can. So our last section here, which I don't have a lot of room for, but hopefully you do. Oh, that was supposed to be a straight line. Is solutions. What do we do about it? And obviously I'm going to give you high level answers, but typically what I'm talking about here is specifically related to our endocrine challenge that we're having and our stress. And so we do, number 1 is endocrine support. Why am I in caps? Endocrine support. And I'll explain that in a minute. Secondly, we'll look at nervous system support, especially for you coffee drinkers and alcohol drinkers, which kind of mess with the nervous system a bit. All the stimulants mess with the nervous system. And blood sugar support, obviously, also. And my third one, which I've kind of run out of room for because you beautiful ladies are in the picture, and I'll just put it down here, and that is other. Other. All right, let's talk about this. So we got that: endocrine support, nervous system support, blood sugar support, and other. Of course, there's a lot of other things in our toolkit as natural medicine practitioners. By the way, I'm a naturopath, natural medicine practitioner. I'm also a life coach. I bring a lot of this coaching stuff into my coaching with people, and I teach yoga, and in particular love yin yoga. If anyone's local, I'm up here at the Virgin Active Gym teaching yin yoga. And I'm an aromatherapist as well, and I love the quantum physics part of essential oils. I've got essential oils all over me today for various reasons. And I also am a wise woman educator. So I teach the women's mysteries. I'm getting more into teaching the blood mysteries, which is the periods and the cycle and all what that means, which is absolutely phenomenal stuff. And all right, so endocrine support, let's talk about that. Endocrine support, we're talking about, firstly in the herbal realm, we're talking about something called adaptogens. Adaptogens support the body's response to stress and make us more resilient. The most common one, the most popular one that you've probably heard of is ginseng. And Siberian ginseng is a lovely adaptogen for the menopausal woman. Thyroid herbs are endocrine support. So there are thyroid herbs. There's ones that contain iodine like bladderwrack, but there's also ones that support that whole endocrine response, and that could be withania, for example. Ashwagandha is the other name for withania, and you can buy that in powder. I've actually made a lovely powder, menopausal powder blend that has ashwagandha in it and various other herbs and powders like maca powder and meadow marshmallow, and licorice is another one. Licorice powder is another great adaptogen, anti-inflammatory. So you can get those things through supplements, you can get them through powders in your smoothie and so on. Other endocrine support, there's some beautiful reproductive herbs such as wild yam or vitex, or herbalists, help me out here, I've forgotten. The other area, of course, for supporting the endocrine system is food. Avoiding the stimulants helps. Certainly coffee needs to be minimized. And the two key things for endocrine support are eating sufficient cholesterol. So one of the best things is eggs. I love eggs as an adrenal tonic, and salt. So sodium is absolutely essential for adrenal health. And you can find that ideally in Celtic sea salt, the grey stuff, which is my favourite. Then we have nervous system support, and in that vein we have the sleep herbs like valerian and passiflora and hops, beautiful herbs for the nervous system. Carminatives, similar as the ones I've just mentioned, and being careful with the stimulants that we use. Now, if you're exhausted, it's very tempting to use stimulants to wake yourself up in the morning. It's like, get out of my way. I'm not doing anything until I've had a coffee. I totally understand, but you do need to manage that. I'm not saying give it up, but I'm saying don't let it get to 2 and 3. Don't let it be your crutch, and because it's fake energy. It spikes cortisol, and it gives you an adrenaline boost, which is going to undermine your health and well-being hugely. It'll give you hot flushes. That's a whole nother story. The next one's blood sugar support. There's some fantastic blood sugar herbs such as cinnamon, gymnema, and various others that help to balance blood sugar levels. You can eat cinnamon in your diet, for example. Obviously avoiding white sugar and white flour is your best bet. trying to minimize the starchy carbs and finding other alternatives, you know, like zucchini noodles or zoodles instead of white pasta. And then the others are natural, other herb categories and treatments can help. Just so you're aware, there are mood elevators like St. John's wort is very good. Anti-inflammatories, I've already given licorice as an example, and there are lots of others, devil's claw and so on. Antioxidants, which might come in the form of herbs or foods or superfoods. So putting some maca powder and some blueberries, into your smoothies, super good. And then often gut herbs are very helpful as well, because gut can be impacted by the stress. There you go. So there are some ideas for solutions, just really to give you a sense that there are a ton of things that you can do before you need to resort to HRT or hysterectomy. So I hope you found that to be useful. Before you go, I'd just like to mention a couple of things. Obviously, this is my passion and my expertise. But that aside, what I really want to tell you is something exciting for me. And this is the first time I've announced it. And that is that I'm creating a retreat, my first ever retreat. And that is to support women through the menopausal transition. The retreat is called Awakening Deep Calm, because calm and presence is the key to getting through all of this transition very beautifully. And that retreat is going to be in October. So if you're interested in what I have to say, I haven't got a lot of time to explain all the details. Plus, we're not really launching it until June officially. But if you'd like to get in early and you're the slightest bit interested in finding out more, then just email me. I think I've emailed you a dozen times about tonight's event. So just reply and say, I'm interested. I'll have a chat with you, or just send me the info, and no pressure, I will do that for you. So just grab my email address from your inbox and reply to me, and I'll do that for you. And then just check my notes. Last thing to mention is I do have a follow-up webinar coming up in early June, and that is to do with being calm. And I have some great processes, not just to tell you about it, but to be it. And the purpose of the retreat really is to give you that experience for the weekend, but to teach you the skills to be able to implement that in your life. So yes, I will give all of that information to you tomorrow in a follow-up email, and I'd love to see you again. So before you go, I would love it as by way of summarizing, for you to just pop in the chat, and I'm looking at the chat here, what your takeaways are. What did you learn? Have a look at your notes. What was an aha for you? What's a new thought that you're going to go and mull over? What did you enjoy hearing about? And please give me some feedback so that I can know that you're listening. Yeah, the blood sugar insulin part of it. Fantastic. Carolina says, great information. Which bit, Carolina? Yeah, the autumn dusk metaphors. Yeah, we are so connected to the cycles. So connected. Here they are coming through now. Celebrate menopause and buy a new ring. Absolutely. Actually, buy a crown. Even better. Buy a crown. Start supporting your body early. Yes, that's the young one saying that. Thanks, Kathy. Underactive thyroid and diabetes. Yes. Really got to get yourself healthy before you hit your 40s or at least mid-40s. Not invisible, no. Lots to offer, totally. And that's my mission, is to help women discover their sacred mission and become that woman who manifests that in the world. And that can be done through your health, through the portal of health. Western society has got it completely wrong. Yes. Thank you. Excellent presentation. Thanks, Julian. Herbalist in 61. Oh, good. Yeah, the rite of passage information is amazing. Kate says, acceptance, compassion, and awareness. Oh, beautiful qualities of the older woman. Ray says, what the hormones do. Yeah, Ray, I'm not sure if you're a fella, but I'm planning to have a menopause webinar for men somewhere down the track. Or just share this with them. Once you get the recordings, share this with the men in your life. They will appreciate it. Yeah, my passion. Thank you, Wendy. Knowledge and insight. Yin and Yang, great concepts. Cortisol can definitely give you heart palpitations. Low blood sugars can give you heart palpitations. Definitely, Karen. Wilder and rawer. Yeah. Yes, going to your herbalist. Yin again, estrogen being the hormone of compliance. Yes, thanks, Sarah. Good to see you here. Yes, you can definitely be a wild woman. I claim that for myself as well. Woohoo! Wilder and rawer, says Joe. Yeah, yin and yang, wilder and rawer. Oh, might have to rename my retreat. Raw and wild. Great information. Carolina got in late, but the effects of estrogen. Yeah, ladies, we need to know that. We absolutely need to know. It's not our fault, right? It's estrogen driving us. We have no say in it. Okay, thanks, Mum, Kathy. Kathy's mum. Go girl. So Melissa is going to go to a party, buy a ring, and celebrate her rite of passage. I actually got a ceremonial woman and did a Harvest Queen ceremony. I know that sounds quite woo-woo, and it was, but I absolutely loved it. And I actually got a crown. I got crowned as a Harvest Queen. And that was my threshold ceremony. And it was amazing. The next day I felt, and this is what we know happens with ceremonies, they increase affiliation. So they make us feel like we belong more to that new group. And that's certainly what that ceremony did for me. And look, it doesn't have to be a Harvest Queen ceremony, but maybe it's just getting all the girls together and celebrating it with wine for a weekend. Your rite of passage. Oh, somebody loves my necklace. Yeah, it's Indian. Isn't it gorgeous? Thanks.